She's the author of 2 children's books to empower children with coping skills and communication strategies when someone they know has cancer. She's the creator of My Story Legacy, a 12-page guide to document personal stories, life values, and wisdom. And she's the founder of 6-Step Screening, an oral cancer awareness initiative. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Eva Grayzel.
Thank you. Survivor is more than a title. It's an attitude. I'll never forget being wheeled away from my husband and mother at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City through these large gray double doors, and a diamond-shaped yellow sign read, "No visitors beyond this point." Dressed in my thin cotton gown on a cold metal gurney, I was wheeled into my parking spot alongside patients coming in and out of surgery. Doctors and nurses were dashing around as I lay there at 8 a.m. for my 9 a.m. surgery slot. At noon, I called over a nurse. "Excuse me, I am so sorry to bother you, but my surgery is supposed to be 12 hours long, and at this point, they'll be operating on my face at midnight. Can we reschedule for tomorrow, please?" "Honey," she said, "don't you worry about it. They do this all the time. Now, do you want a magazine?" And that's when I felt this frustration deep inside begin to erupt. Why didn't my dentists know what was staring at them on the lateral border of my tongue? Why didn't my oral surgeons question the first biopsy? I had nowhere to direct my frustration but at this nurse. Do you know, I may never speak articulately again. I may never swallow normally. Tomorrow I may not recognize my own face. And you're asking me if I want a magazine? She backed up, apologized, and walked away. I had nowhere to direct my frustration but upward. How could you do this to me? I stopped myself, remembering wise words of a friend who said, when you're angry, you're weak. I looked right back up and I said, "Thank you for doing this to me and not to my children." I lashed out yet again, but why stage 4? I stopped myself. Thank you for doctors who could give me hope. But why my tongue? Of every part of this body, why my tongue? I had been a professional performance artist, reaching people through powerful stories, so why my tongue? Thank you for taking a third of my tongue and not a third of my brain. When I started to think this way, I felt this strength begin to well up in me. I looked my cancer in the eye and said, "You are not going to squat your ugly face in this vessel, because I am going to fight." I awoke in the neurosurgical ICU. My tongue was so swollen, every crevice of my oral cavity was filled to capacity. My mouth was like an overstuffed suitcase. My tongue like a balloon full of air. Suddenly, my eyes focused. My brain kicked into action. I rolled my eyes upward and saw my left arm in a cast, suspended from an IV pole. I rolled my eyes downward and saw tubes adorning my gown, the largest emanating from my nostril. My left leg was immobile. With my right hand, I explored this bandage on my left leg, unable to feel the end of it, and then my eyes focused on signs around me which read, "Neck should not be moved." Beforehand, we didn't know how much surgery I needed. If the tumor in my tongue was small enough, I would not have needed a reconstruction of a third of my tongue. If the spread to my lymph nodes was minimal, I would not have needed a radical neck dissection. But at that moment, I realized it had all been done. This was the unimaginable made real. 1/3 of my tongue was removed and reconstructed. Tissue from my forearm was used to replace the outside of my tongue. An artery was taken from my arm to feed blood from the carotid to the graft site. I have 3 grafts on my leg. One of them was to replace the forearm tissue, and the other 2 are to take fascia to rebuild the density in my tongue. I required this radical neck dissection because lymph nodes cling to the sternocleidomastoid muscle. In my case, the entire muscle had to be removed. They found cancer in 3 of 40 lymph nodes. I was diagnosed at stage 4. Fortunately, they left the tip of my tongue intact, and this is what enables me to articulate my speech. I was fortunate to have a head and neck pathologist working side by side with my surgeon. Every slice removed from my tongue was examined for clear margins before they took another slice. When people hear my story, they feel sorry for me, but in truth, I am one of the lucky ones. By the 3rd day in the ICU, and I was moved to a room on the 7th floor of the Guggenheim Pavilion. At 5:30 a.m., my light was flicked on. Resident doctors were lined up outside my door, waiting for their chance to prick my graft to see if blood was flowing to the site. This occurred every hour for the next few days. Sounds painful. I didn't feel a thing. Even today, I'd feel very little of that. There was a suture at the back of my tongue that scraped my throat with every word. I had to contain thoughts, choose words carefully. Would I ever speak articulately again? Would I swallow normally? Would I go back to the work that I loved? But I had this more pressing question. Would the thick black fly hair now grow on my inner wrist? No, more troublesome is the thought that maybe the black arm hair. Okay, look, I am someone that takes care of unwanted hair. And I wonder if now I have 2 more areas of unwanted hair to deal with. I finally got up the nerve to ask my surgeon. He chuckled. He said he'd seen it in some men. I knew he was looking at his first female specimen. My husband barely left my side. He was so attentive. I just wonder why he can't be like that all the time. He constantly urged me to get up and move. But walking was painful. The grafts on my leg would shift with every step. But even scarier was the feeling when upright, my head would just roll off my shoulders. Now that I only had one muscle supporting my head, I needed to relearn how to balance my head on my spine. Hospitals are a lonely place. You're up at 5:30. Your visitors come at noon when you're tired. So one day I was feeling kind of lonely, and this aide came into my room to change my sheets. She asked me to get out of bed, so I took my IV pole with my casted arm dangling from it, and I hobbled out of bed over to my boom box. I pushed play on the cassette player, and I had in there my favorite music, which is Broadway tunes. And out came the most appropriate tune, sung by the Tin Man in the show The Wiz. And it went like something like this. Slide some oil to me, let it slip down my spine. Standing here in one position sure can make one tired. Slip some to my elbow and my fingers, if you would. Come on to slide some oil to me, girl. Does that feel good? Well, that aide, that aide was dancing around the corners of my bed sheets, tucking them in, saying, "You go, girl." You know, it surprised me that feeling as low as I did, music brought me joy. By the 8th day, Dr. Erkin said if I could swallow applesauce without choking, I could go home. And by the 10th day, I succeeded. When they removed the cast from my arm, I saw this long curving row of black stitches to a deep red hollowed area, and I turned away in disgust. But I knew it was me now. I knew I had to own it. And I forced myself to look at my arm, and I saw a curving string attached to a red balloon. And I vowed I would grab hold of that red balloon because it could only take me upward, the only direction I could go from where I'd been. 6 weeks post-op, my speech was returning to normal. I slurred my S's a little bit, had difficulty with some R's, but I worked with a speech therapist to resolve the issue. I could only chew on the right because I didn't, and I still don't, taste or feel on the left. When chewing food like a moist piece of chicken, food spreads in your mouth like food does. I thought I was chewing the chicken. My surgeon assured me it would heal, and it did. At our 6-week post-op appointment, I pursued my long-running joke with Dr. Erkin, showing him the thigh stubble that I was now shaving. And I asked him if he saw anything back there. I opened wide. His expression changed. In a serious tone, he said, "I see 2. Well, we did more important things than tweeze at this appointment, which took care of the problem. Follow-up therapy. He told me radiation had to begin within 8 weeks of surgery. Every week I delayed treatment, I would lose a 5% chance of surviving. I had been given a 15% chance of surviving 5 years. So there was no time to waste. We were at the 6-week limit. I had 2 weeks to start radiation. When you're stage 4, there aren't a lot of radiation decisions to be made. So rather than drive from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania into New York City every day for treatment, all the doctors suggested we look close to home. So the following day, I had 2 appointments with 2 local radiation oncologists, and they both said the same thing: maximum dose of radiation to both sides of my neck, because there was a 10% chance the cancer came over to the right. Radiation would be 5 days a week for 6 weeks for the maximum dose. There was one difference between these 2 doctors. One offered standard radiation. It's like taking a can of paint and throwing it on a canvas. The other offered IMRT, intensity modulated radiation therapy. It's targeted. It targeted the tumor site in my tongue with the maximum dose of radiation, but because it came at all these different angles, it spared the normal tissues and glands in and around the area. Dr. Vigneri said this new technology is even able to block an area we don't want radiated. He said he thinks there's a less than 1% chance the cancer came over to the right and then went up into my salivary gland. He said we could block that gland and you will have a better quality of life. First time I heard those words, I thought, well, I want that. I learned there were only 12 IMRT machines up and running in this country when I had treatment, and now it's the standard of care. So I got very lucky. The following day, I was in the hospital for prep work, laid down on this cold, hard platform with my head resting on a neck support, and a radiation therapist came into the room with this warm plastic mesh. And the idea was to tattoo the mask instead of my facial skin. With surgery, you feel better every day, and there's a lot of hope. But with radiation, you get worse every day, and you keep thinking, it can't get worse than this. And it does. So it started with blisters. it's a heat treatment. Blisters lined my oral cavity and throat. The largest blister was under my tongue. It took me like 20 minutes to consume 1 teaspoon of cream of wheat till I could tolerate the pain of another mouthful. I walked around my home with a spit cup in one hand and a washcloth dangling from my mouth so I wouldn't have to swallow my own saliva. I thought radiation can't get worse than this. It did. Radiation made my tongue get stiff. It made choking more frequent. My vocal cords dried up, stopped vibrating. I lost my voice. And then my saliva got thick and gluey. It was too sticky to spit. When I would lie down to rest, I would awaken in this panic, unable to cough up the blockage in the back of my throat, thinking, this might be my very last breath. I learned very quickly to spend my nights upright, which I did, in my living room sofa downstairs with my head wedged between the 2 back pillows. And during these long, dark nights, I felt myself begin to wither away from the fear, pain, and a lot of loneliness. I thought, surely radiation can't get worse than this. It did. Radiation made my epiglottis dry up, and loose saliva would drip into my trachea, triggering these severe coughing fits, causing these blisters to open and bleed. The only thing that would stop the coughing fits was the heat and steam of a hot shower. I was in and out of the shower throughout the day and throughout the night. I tried to keep my sanity while going through the insanity of treatments for oral cancer. I became utterly exhausted. I could barely eat, hardly sleep, couldn't speak, and I reached that deep, dark place where I made a decision. I gave treatments my best and I just couldn't go on. That night, I wrote a note to my husband about where I wanted to be buried, what I wanted written on my tombstone. I felt it was one less thing he'd have to worry about. I wrote a letter to my children about my dreams and wishes for them, my pride and joy in them, my values that I hoped would live on. And the following day, I felt it was only fair to tell Dr. Vigneri face to face about my decision. We sat down in his office, and he looked at me with his gentle eyes, and he said, Eva, radiation to the head and neck is the most difficult place of the entire body to tolerate therapy. Is there anything you want to talk about? And in my hoarse whisper, I said, I'm quitting. He rolled his chair back. He stood up. He put his hands on his desk. He leaned in close to my face, and I'll never forget the words he spoke. Don't tell me you're quitting. This isn't a game that you quit. It's your life. Find the strength. I stood up. I walked down the hallway and I took another treatment. And another one after that. Crying made my symptoms unbearable. I learned fast to control the tears. I fought ugly thoughts with pretty ones. I replaced all those unhappy endings with happy ones. I dreamed about my future. I watched and read anything that would make me laugh. Laughing was medicine, even if it was only for a moment. The funniest card that I got said, now that you're going through radiation, your husband can say he's married to a really hot babe. I made it through radiation, all of the treatments. You have far more strength than you think you have. And during that time, if I were to give anybody advice, I would say that nobody takes care of you like you. When you need a break, you take it. When you need to send someone home, send them home. Because nobody can take care of you like you. Let me tell you how it all started with a sore on the left side of my tongue. An unusual place for what seemed like an ordinary canker sore. After 8 weeks, I go to a local oral surgeon. He examines it. I complain of the pain. He says, if it bothers you, we'll take it off. I said, great, take it off. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from his receptionist. She said my biopsy was negative. I said, excuse me, are you calling the right patient? She said, oh, did you have tissue removed from your tongue 2 weeks ago? And I said, yeah, but I didn't know it was being biopsied. I literally thought to myself, what on earth could they be looking for in a biopsy of the tongue? She said, you have nothing to worry about. And I said, great. I didn't know I needed to worry. She should have said, your biopsy was negative for cancer. I never heard those words. I never knew. You can get cancer in the mouth. If I knew that, I would have been more proactive. But nobody educated me. 2 years go by, but I have no obvious symptoms. Early stage oral cancer is asymptomatic. You don't feel it. But the tissue back here was changing. The color and the texture was changing. But nobody educated me to look back there regularly, to observe it. And my dentist thought nothing of it. Why? Because I was young. I never smoked. I rarely drank. I had no risk factors. So when I returned 9 months later with another lesion on my tongue, they said it's trauma. Rinses and gels. They shaved my teeth down. They gave me a night guard to wear. One doctor told me maybe if I talked a little less, it would go away. I know you're laughing, but I know what you're really thinking. Like, how could he? I finally went into New York City, and there I got the answers I had been waiting for a very long time. And Dr. Erkin, after this minimally invasive procedure, he had to call, my husband was at work in Bethlehem, so they called my mother, who lives in Englewood, to be by my side when they delivered the news that I had late-stage oral cancer. I just never even heard of it, so I went into shock. When I got home, the first thing I did was cancel upcoming storytelling performances, which I'm going to give you a little taste of in a little bit. Then we celebrated our daughter's 5th birthday party, and the hardest thing was calling friends and family, telling them the news. And on April 15th, when most Americans were filing their tax papers, I was filing medical releases, literally signing my life away. And that one Broadway tune went through my mind all the time, the one from The Phantom. Think of me fondly when we say goodbye. Remember me once in a while. Please promise me you'll try. You know, when you think you might die, you worry about how you'll be remembered. My children, Jeremy, age 7, and Elena, age 5, could barely look at me. But how could I blame them? I couldn't look at myself. They didn't touch me. They were afraid to touch me. But how could I blame them? I couldn't, 10 minutes, I get it. I couldn't touch or dress my own wounds. Elena would stick her tongue out at me, ignore me. One day she kicked my shins. And I grabbed her and I sat her on my lap and I said, why are you so angry at me? And she said, bad mommy. Darted away. She no longer wanted me to put her to bed. The coughing, the spitting, it's a very public disease. Now that we have masks, that would have been great. I wish we had them back then. It would have hidden some of the effects of treatment for me from my children. One day she cried out, I want my mommy, from her bed. I was ecstatic. I went to her bedroom and I rubbed her back and the room was dark and I said, it's me, it's Mom. I want my mommy. Thought she didn't hear me. I leaned in closer and I said, "It's me, it's your mom. I want my mommy," and I got it. We all wanted the old mom back, but it doesn't work that way. Cancer is a family affair. My son, 3 years after I recovered, he was in a gift shop with my mom looking for birthday cards, and he found a get well card. And he said to my mom, "Grandma, let's buy this for mom." And my mom said, "Jeremy, your mom's not sick anymore." This is how deep the trauma goes with children. My daughter didn't kiss me for 2 years, and I know why. She was afraid of losing me, and she was afraid to commit to another day of loving me. I took her for therapy, but nobody knows my daughter as well as I do. She was very competitive with Jeremy, who was only 18 months older. And one day, I came up with this idea for a game called the Smallest Kiss in the World, a competition. And Jeremy took my head so gently, and he gave me this little eeny, weeny, teeny little kiss. And I said, "Oh, Jeremy, that was medium to big." And then Elena said, "Let me try." And she grabbed my head like a football, and she angled it just the way she wanted it. She leaned in to give me a kiss. I didn't even feel it on my peach fuzz. But I said, "Jeremy did a better job than that." She goes, "Huh? Let me try again." She started to ask to play the game. And this is what put us on the road to recovery. When I reached my 10-year cancer-free anniversary, I could think of no better way to market than to write a book to help children just like my own. And I've also published a story legacy. You want to write out your stories when you're well, not when you're sick. And I hope today my story will encourage you to write out your story for future generations that include your best moments, your dreams, your wishes, your challenges, and how you overcame them. Because your stories are more valuable than material possessions sometimes. It gives children a piece of their identity. When I was balancing on that tightrope between life and death, I thought good and hard about how I would be remembered. We're going to be remembered for how we make a difference in other people's lives. This story is 2,000 years old. And it's about a young man who gave up his life to save someone else. And when he went to the world beyond, he was asked whether he wanted to reside in the place up above or the place down below. Well, this young guy said, "Hey, I want to see both places before I make my decision." And first, he went down below. And there he saw this big pot of sweet-smelling, bubbling soup in the center of the space. And people were sitting all around. And everybody had a long-handled spoon, long enough to reach the nutritious soup. But when he looked at the people, they were sick, pale, just miserable. Then he went up above. Surprisingly enough, he saw the exact same thing. A big pot of sweet-smelling, bubbling in the center of the space, and people were sitting all around. Everybody had a long-handled, long enough to reach the soup. But when he looked at the people up above, they were smiling, they were full, robust. The young man wondered, why? The difference when both places have the exact same thing. Down below, the people were trying to feed themselves. The handles of the spoons were so long that by the time they got the soup could never reach their own mouths. Up above, he noticed the people didn't even try to feed themselves. They only fed each other. And when this young man was asked again whether he wanted to reside up above or down below, where do you think he chose? Point. The original version of this story says he chose to live up above because he deserves to be in a good place. But like some of you, I believe he chose to live down below because there he could make a difference. And so do you. it's human nature to lament your losses. And it's a skill to remember your gifts. Throughout my ordeal with oral cancer, I never lost the ability to make a choice. And when we choose to face whatever our life challenges with strength, we turn adversity into opportunity to leave a legacy of choosing courage, choosing gratitude, choosing moments to cherish. These virtues that we choose have this rippling effect. It inspires all those that know us, and through them, we can inspire countless lives.
Were you spiritual before?
Yes, after my illness, I lost all faith. But I didn't want to rob my children of faith. One of the things that I did when I put my children to bed after I regained my voice was I would bless them. And I did my blessings through gratitude. What I learned is that prayers are ineffective if you're bargaining or promising. Prayers are most effective when it's just a prayer of gratitude. So I would say thank you for blessing me with my son Jeremy, who is so conscientious of his friends' feelings, who calls grandma without being asked. And then I would follow it with, help Jeremy find the strength to whatever I wanted him to work on. Once I said, help Jeremy remember to lift the toilet seat. Instead of yelling at him in the heat of anger after sitting in his urine yet again, he said, Mom, what's the big deal? And I explained what happens to my backside when I sit on his urine. And you know what? He never forgot to lift the toilet seat again. Once I said, help Jeremy find the strength to walk into the kitchen and say, what can I do to help? It was brilliant. So he'd walk into the kitchen, he'd go, what can I do to help? I'd say, thank you for asking. Could you empty the dishwasher, set the table, whatever it was. So my philosophy on faith is that God didn't give me this disease because I wasn't a bad person. But if God doesn't give me the disease, God isn't going to heal me from the disease. That just makes sense. So then the question is, where is God? And I would tell you that God is in all the people. God is in you. God is in the people who came when they didn't need to, when they didn't have to, came to help me, to support me, to show their friendship. And that was God. Any other thoughts or questions?
How is it going with your outreach?
6-step screening. Over COVID, I designed the poster, which I have up here, into lots of different languages. So people all over the world can educate patients and save them from the late stages of this disease. Caught early, it's very survivable. I'd like to conclude today with a story, and I would like one person from every table, you guys choose, who comes up here on stage with me. Pick one person, come on up. Thank you, Okay. So this story is about these, wait, hang on, let me stand here. It's about these apple trees. And these apple trees lived in a forest full of very big, tall oak trees. And every night they'd look up. And in the darkness, they saw stars dangling on the branches of the oak trees. It wasn't fair. They wanted stars on their branches just like those oak trees. And every night they made a wish in sign language. And they said, repeat after me. They said, I want more than anything. I want more than anything. To have stars on my branches, just like those oak trees. every night they made this wish. Do you know what? Nothing happened. The seasons passed, and these apple trees began to grow these beautiful blossoms. And birds would come to sit on these apple trees to whistle. And yet, it wasn't enough, because every night they look up, and in the darkness they saw, dangling on the branches of the... It wasn't fair. They wanted stars on their branches, and they made their wish in sign language. Let's all do it together, everybody. And the apple tree said, I want more than anything to have stars on my branches, just like the oak tree. Every night they made this wish. Do you know what? Nothing happened. The seasons passed, and these apple trees began to grow these big, juicy apples of every color of the rainbow, every color of the Crayola crayon box. What color are your apples?
Red, obviously.
Okay.
Black.
Ooh.
I'm all about magenta.
Woo.
Pink.
Yeah.
Gray color. Yeah. Periwinkle. Chartreuse.
These apple trees were so beautiful. People would come to sit under these trees to talk, play, picnic, and laugh, and yet it wasn't enough. Because every night they'd look, and they saw dangling on the branches of the... It wasn't fair. So they made their wish in sign language. Now let's all try it in sign language, which means we move our hands and our lips, but we don't make a sound. The apple tree said, wait a second, the woodcutter is back there. I think he just finished chopping his wood. Hopefully they don't chop down your apple trees. The apple tree said, the heavens above heard their wish, and there was a gentle breeze through the trees. And as the breeze went through the trees, there was a voice. And the voice said, isn't it enough that you have big juicy apples that people sit under your trees to talk and play? Isn't that enough? And the little apple tree shook their limbs. No! So there was an even greater wind, such a wind that the branches began to move wildly in the wind, and the apples began to drop from the trees. And as the apples dropped from the trees, they broke in half. And the apple tree looked inside. What do you see?
Stars.
The apple tree said, I had stars in my branches all along. I just never knew it. And each and every one of you here has a star within you, just like this apple. And if you don't know what you're a star at, or you have lost sight of what you're a star at, all you need to do is do what this apple tree did. Change your direction. Instead of cutting your apple from the top to the bottom, cut it through the middle, and you too will rediscover the star that's within you. Thank you.